Okay, thank you, Linda. I think I mentioned in my little blurb that my husband Jerry and I started going there in 2012. We tried it out, we rented a place and then to decide if we liked it or not. And unfortunately, that first winter we were there, February, March, April of 2012, it was gloomy and kind of cold. And so I said, let's go somewhere south and see if it's better down there. So we went down to Las Cruces, we went down to Las Cruces, which if you've been to New Mexico, it's way in the south. And yeah, it was warmer down there. It was a lot warmer down there, but I didn't like it down there. So we came back to Santa Fe, and by the time we came back, it was sunny and it was nice. And so we said, this is it. So we've been going down there ever since to spend the winter. So who here has been to Santa Fe? Oh, not that many. I thought maybe it would be more. Okay, well, good. This is, I mean, not good, but for the tourism, part, it's not so great that there are not very many people that have been there. But I don't know if you knew that it's called the City Different, and I hope by the end of this program you will understand why it's called the City Different. Nobody really knows how that came about, who named it the City Different, but that's kind of its nickname, and that has really stuck. And they use that, of course, to promote it, so. And these pictures that you see right here, I will talk about at some point. But this is what we're going to look at. We're going to look at the history of Santa Fe and the architecture, which is a very significant part of Santa Fe, the culture, and things to see and do. So hopefully you'll be enticed to go there and you'll have some things that you'll know what to do. So starting with the history, the first people of Santa Fe, of course, were indigenous people. It wasn't called Santa Fe. It was actually called Oga Po'oge, which means white shell water place. So water, you don't think of water so much when you think of New Mexico. It's very dry there, it's a desert, but there is a river there, the Santa Fe River, which I want to show you a picture of the Santa Fe River. This is what it looks like right now. That doesn't look much like anything that would attract people, I don't think, but I think that it didn't used to look like this. It used to be, it used to be a bigger river. Things have changed. There have been changes to the whole city. It used to be kind of actually sort of swampy. And so a lot of that has been drained and the watersheds have been changed with dams and all that kind of stuff. And so this is the poor, pitiful little Santa Fe River today. If it rains a lot, which it does in the summer, they call it the monsoon season, then that does change. Now I know there's a way to go back here, Dick. I should have checked this out earlier. All right, I'll just do the numbers. Okay. So those first people were attracted by the water, apparently. And then that was around, they're not really sure when, sometime between 900 and 1100 AD or Common Era, somewhere in there. They don't really know because about 200 years before the Spanish arrived, they left. And we don't know why they left either, whether there was a drought or they just didn't like it there, what the reason was. But they left about 200 years before the Spanish came, which was in 1598. So, this gives you an idea of how old the Santa Fe area really is. Of course, the Spanish, came to the New World a lot sooner than the English did. So the oldest city in what is now the United States is St. Augustine in Florida. I think that was founded something like 1565. And Santa Fe is just kind of behind that. 1598 was when the first Spaniard arrived. And unfortunately, that Spaniard was not a nice person. His name was Juan de Oñate, and he was very brutal to the indigenous people, really brutal. I won't even go into how brutal it was. Just imagine how brutal you could be, and that's the way he was. He was so brutal that the Spaniards actually eventually ejected him from what was then New Mexico, and then they had a trial in Mexico for all of his brutalities, and just threw him out altogether. But he was the first guy that went there, and he didn't really He didn't settle right in Santa Fe. It was actually a little north of Santa Fe where he went. But he went all around the area that's now New Mexico and brutalized the people there. At the time he came, there were over 100 pueblos there. Now, pueblo is the Spanish word for village, and they named them that because unlike a lot of nomadic tribes, what you think of people that lived in teepees or wigwams or things like that, the Pueblo people built cities. They built structures. They had big structures. You can still see one now. You can go to Taos and see Taos Pueblo, which is 4 or 5 stories high. These were really very large structures that they built out of adobe, what they call puddled adobe, which really was just they would just sort of take it, the mud and the straw, and they would sort of slap it up onto, and start just sort of build on it. They'd let it dry and then they'd put some more up and they'd build on it. It wasn't until the Spanish came who saw that and thought that was pretty good material because it was readily available. And then they decided to make forms, so they made bricks, and that's the way they did it. But the original indigenous people did not do it that way. They did this puddled adobe. But anyway, they had left the Santa Fe area about 200 years before 1598 when Oñate came, but they still encountered this guy. So after he left, in 1609, there was a guy named Peralta who was sent by the viceroy of Spain, of New Spain, to go and create a city. They wanted, where Santa Fe is now, they wanted a city there. So he went there in 1610 and started building a city. So you see what I've got here. That's the arrival of the Spanish. And then there was the expulsion of the Spanish. And you say, well, how did that happen? Well, I'll talk about that in a minute, but first just let me show you here's a statue of Peralta. This is him on the horse, and he's saying to his, aide, that's where I want to build the city. So they made a statue to him, and that's where it is. And you'll notice in the background there is what I consider to be the ugliest building in all of Santa Fe. It's the federal building, not surprisingly. I think all I can figure is because, as I will talk about, there's a lot of restrictions on how you can build things in Santa Fe, what they have to look like. And this isn't it. So I think the federal government must just say, we're the federal government. We can do what we want. You can't tell us what to do. I don't know. But this is kind of the main post office and the federal government. And the building, I think, is truly pretty ugly. But anyway, so back to the expulsion of the Spanish. All the brutality that was committed against them, it just went on and on until finally, a lot of this had to do with the priests too, who were there, because they were trying to convert the Indians, and the Indians didn't want to be converted. And so in, I think it was 1675, they hauled in 47 of the shaman or medicine men or whatever from the indigenous areas, brought them into the plaza, the center of Santa Fe, and well, they hung 3 of them and flogged the rest of them right in public, as a lesson for everybody. This is the way you're going to be treated. Well, that just got to be too much for people. And there was a guy named Popé who just brainstormed and decided that he was going to do something about this. So he wanted to have a rebellion, but he knew that each individual pueblo couldn't do it alone. They all had to do it together. This was before social media, so it was a little harder to get together, and especially a vast territory like New Mexico, that area, which, by the way, is, if you didn't know, the 5th largest state in the country, believe it or not. And that includes Alaska. It's 5th largest state. Anyway, so what he did was he developed this system with a rope, and it had cords, it had knots tied in the rope, a certain number of knots. And then he sent messengers out with these ropes to all the pueblos, and they were to untie a knot every day. And when they got to the end, then that was the day. And there were some difficulties along the way. The two of the messengers got captured and tortured, and so he ended up having to do it a day early. But anyway, I don't know how he communicated all that, but they did it. They all went together and they killed 400 people. That included women, children. They besieged the city of Santa Fe, and the Spaniards were able to hold them off long enough that they were able to escape. 2,000 people, 2,000 Spaniards left New Mexico. It's said to be the only time in the history of the New World that the indigenous people drove the Europeans out. And that was in 1680. So that lasted about 12 years. And then the Spaniards came back. So there we have, that's why I have the return of the Spanish. But before I get to that, I want to show you, in the Capitol of the United States, in the Capitol building, there's every state gets 2 statues. I don't know if you've been to the Capitol and seen that. New Mexico was the last one to appoint or to have created a second statue. Everybody gets 2. And their statue was Pope, the second one. And there he is. Nobody knows what he really looked like, but you see the rope there with the knots hanging down. And the back of the statue, you can see the scars on his back. And that was from the flogging that he got. So the return of the Spanish, I think things were a little better. They weren't great still for the indigenous people, but they were somewhat better. So, things, the Spanish can learn a little lesson on that, I think. But this is what a 20th century rendering of a murdered priest is, So I think the Spaniards remembered all this, and they didn't want it to happen again, so they were a little more careful. There actually was a cross erected. They called the Cross of the Martyrs. They put it on a big hill above the city of Santa Fe where everybody could see it. And this is the original Cross of the Martyrs, which is no longer on that hill. It's on a hill, but it's a hill that hardly anybody in the city knows where it is. We happen to know where it is because we live kind of close to it. And I walk by it a lot when I'm out walking. They moved it because they decided they wanted to build housing up on that hill. The typical thing, right? So I'm not really sure what happened, but they decided finally against that. And so they didn't build the housing, so they put up a different cross because they wanted to have one up there. And so that's the other cross, which is not quite as, I don't know, not quite as artistic, I think, as the other one. So looking at them, this is a map of Santa Fe in 1846, I think. Yeah, 1846 to 47. And you can see, as in many Spanish type cities, there's the plaza. You see that in the center? That's like the center of everything is the plaza. And then there's a church over here on the right, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And right here, it says Governor's House. They now call that the Palace of the Governors, and that was built in 1610, and I can show you that right here. We're going to talk about that in terms of architecture. But this is the Palace of the Governors from 1610. Now, of course, it's been renovated. It's been, it's been added to a little bit and revised a little bit, but it's now a museum. And you see under that covering there, which when you have an area like that we might call a porch, that's called a portal in Santa Fe. That's where the Indians on any day of the week during the daylight hours are there to sell their wares. I happen to have one of their wares, which I bought many, many years ago before I moved to Santa Fe. So I thought I would bring that and just pass it around. It's a bracelet that the design on there is supposed to indicate rain. But they sell all kinds of stuff, jewelry, pottery, some textiles. And, they have to have a permit, of course. They have to prove somehow that they're real Indians, and in order to be able to sell there. But that's what goes on at the Palace of the Governors. I happened to take this photo really early in the morning before they got there. You see there's one car there. They're probably getting set up. And across from the Palace of the Governors is the plaza. So it's right there in the heart of the city. So after the Spanish returned, the things changed in Mexico. What was a Spanish colony, it sort of revolted against the Spaniards, and Mexico became independent. And that happened in 1821. And so for the first time, the New Mexicans were allowed to trade with the United States. The Spanish wouldn't allow that for some reason. I'm not really sure why. So in 1821, they established the Santa Fe Trail, which is commemorated, all over the city, wherever, there might be where it had passed through. Oh, yeah.
What's the difference between being Spanish and being Mexican?
Well, it's the Spanish people that lived in Mexico, then I guess the ones who stayed consider themselves to be Mexican. Just like here, the people here that stayed.
Some of them intertwined.
Oh, sure. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, Santa Fe became a real important place because of the trade, that came from Missouri is really where the Santa Fe Trail started. And there was even a stagecoach that ran, I think once a month, starting sometime like 1850 or 1860. So then you had, the pioneers coming and some Americans coming. And then in 1846, I think it was, the United States decided that, we want to take over that part of Mexico. And so there was war, the Spanish, the Mexican-American War, and eventually New Mexico became part of the United States, but it was only a territory for many years. And Santa Fe, all that time, maintained being the capital. So that's why it was the capital of the part of New Spain, New Mexico, that was there. And then when it became a territory, it was the capital of the territory of New Mexico. And then became a state ultimately in 1912, which I know seems really late, considering how old it is, but New Mexico is not well thought of by the powers that be in Washington. They thought that it was backward. People didn't speak English, sound familiar? Well, anyway, so it took a long time and a lot of persuasion to get it to entered in as a state. And originally they talked about combining it with Arizona and making it that one big state, but I guess they finally decided to split them up. And they both became states in the same year. New Mexico was first in January, I think, of 1912, and then Arizona followed a couple of months later. So that's going back to the history. So we went, as I said, we went Spanish to Mexican, then Mexican to American, from American territory to an American state. And that didn't happen until 1912. So talking about the architecture a little bit, I talked a little bit already about the Pueblo style, the way the Indians built their buildings. And the Spanish kind of adopted that, and so that kind of continued, except that they made their adobe into bricks. And then they would build the structure and then put more adobe on the outside of it to smooth it out, make it look a little smoother. And then when New Mexico was a territory, things changed. I mean, there were houses built that could have come out of Alpena. I mean, this was considered the territorial style. The Americans moved in, and so they brought their style with them. Eventually, though, we're going to talk about why that is. There was what was developed Santa Fe style. What happened was in I think it was 1888 was when the railroad came. The Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe, which if you know anything about that railroad, you know it never went to Santa Fe. And that was because the engineers, when they started looking at that, they realized that they couldn't, to get from Santa Fe to out, down south, you know, like Albuquerque, was just too difficult. There were a lot of things in the way. And so they decided not to go to Santa Fe, which you can imagine didn't do much for Santa Fe. And the economy started to decline. And so the I don't know, Santa Fe fathers or whatever decided, you know, they needed to do something about this. And so eventually Santa Fe became developed into this kind of cultural mecca. You know, and we'll talk about that a little bit. There is a train that goes, they built a spur, what they call a spur, that goes from Lamy, which is a little town just near Santa Fe, goes from Lamy to Santa Fe. So I guess that way they could at least, you know, they could have some goods that would go from the train, you know, get into Santa Fe that way. Plus tourists, you know, could take, who back then used to take the train. Of course, there wasn't a lot of options other than stagecoach. So eventually the Santa Fe style was developed, and we'll talk a little bit about this. But first, the Pueblo style. This is an example of a house. This is considered the oldest house in the United States. I don't know if that's true or not, but probably not. But it's the oldest house certainly that was built by non-Indians. I think they're Indian houses, like Taos Pueblo, I think is older. But you can see you know, the outside of this house is, you know, it's fairly smooth. And then you see these things sticking out, these beams kind of sticking out. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But this house supposedly was built in 1646. They say, you know, the foundation is still there. That was the original foundation. Maybe this weren't the original walls. Adobe is very hard to maintain, you can imagine. And then the Palace of the Governors is another example of that Pueblo revival, is what they call it. Uh-huh.
Something. Did they all design either? Is that how, was it that like sleek?
Well, probably not that sleek, but no, you see really old pictures of it, and you can tell that's what it is. I mean, they've had to resurface the outside and, you know, and stuff, but yeah. 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 So then this is the San Miguel Chapel, which is considered the oldest church in the United States. And it started to be built in 1610, and I guess it took 16 years or something. And this is made out of those adobe bricks. And this is kind of a close-up where they have these sort of supports on the outside that really, where you can see the brick, actually, that wasn't covered over, like, you know, like it was on the rest of it. So then the territorial style that I mentioned, here's a house that, you know, like I said, you could maybe find this house in Alpena, right? I'm not sure exactly when this house was built. I'm guessing probably the mid to late 19th century. And anytime you see a house like this, you know that it predated the Santa Fe style, because this definitely is not Santa Fe style. And, you know, anytime you see a regular brick house, you know that. So you see this house. This is the Tully house, built in 1851. Well, you know, there's a brick house, you think. It's actually not a brick house. That's fake. It's all painted to look like brick. So I thought I'd include it just because it's kind of fun, you know, that it's, yeah. And people will stand there and they'll look at it, and, you know, it really does look exactly like brick. It's pretty amazing. And then you have the federal courthouse. Once again, that's, you know, kind of I mean, this one is a little better looking than the other one, but it's still not like the traditional style. It's more of I guess, the territorial style, but mid 19th century, as you can see. Took a number of years to build it, apparently. So Santa Fe style. how did that come about? Well, there were a lot of artists that started moving into Santa Fe in the early 20th century because they had tuberculosis and they were in New York City and the air was bad. And so they had this idea that going to a desert climate would help their tuberculosis. So they started flocking to Santa Fe. Even though the railroad didn't go there, they went there anyway. So they put their heads together and they thought, you know, we've got something really unique here. We look at these old Pueblo buildings. They're really unusual. You don't see them anywhere else. You know, why don't we develop a style like that? So for the 1915 Panama Exposition in San Diego, they built a building there. And that was the first building that was in the Santa Fe style. So then they came back to Santa Fe and they thought, well, okay, maybe we should build one in Santa Fe. And so they built this one, the Museum of Art, in 1917, which is definitely a Santa Fe style building. It's one of the oldest buildings. They just, you know, recently celebrated their 100th birthday. So also, here's the inner courtyard, and this is where you see all those beams that stick out, and then you see these decorative elements under the portal, and that they have a name too, and I'm going to go into that a little bit. There's Jerry standing there in the courtyard. It's a wonderful museum. There are a lot of, I should mention how many museums there are in Santa Fe. There are probably, well, the city likes to say something like 14, but you know, really about 9 or 10 that are really significant museums, I think. And this is one of them. And they had so much art that they decided they needed a new building. And so just in the last 2 years, they built a brand new building. I mean, they still have this one and they still have art here, but they have a new one too.
That piece of art in the center, is there something that you could elaborate on? It's
Not me. Do you know, Jerry?
no,
It's an obelisk of some kind. Yeah, you know, I don't know. I don't think there's any sign about that. That I can tell you about the frescoes along the sides though. They were painted by Will Schuster, right? Who's pretty famous in Santa Fe. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of Will Schuster, but you're going to hear a little bit more about him right at the end of this presentation. But he was an artist. The most famous artist to ever live in Santa Fe is, of course, Georgia O'Keeffe, right? And she didn't really live in Santa Fe for very long, just a few years. She lived in other places in New Mexico, but there are a number of other artists. You know, I was trying to think of ones that maybe people would have heard of, and I don't think I would have heard of any of them before I got to Santa Fe, so probably names wouldn't mean much to you, but gee, I think so, yeah. Randall Davies, ever heard of him? Olive Rush, Gerald Cassidy. Gerald Cassidy is one that died young because of all the lead and the paint and stuff that he did. Oh, and you know that really ugly building I showed you at the beginning, the courthouse, the federal building there? Inside the lobby of that federal building are 2 paintings by Gerald Cassidy that are wonderful. Nobody knows they're there. If you go to Santa Fe, go into that building and see them. On the one side, you have the Indians looking over to the other side, you know, and they've got their bows and arrows and their spears and stuff, and they're looking. And on the other side, you have the conquistadors, right? In their armor and on their horses and their, you know, so it's a really great juxtaposition of these 2 paintings, you know, to illustrate what really happened in this part of the country. Another building that's of the Santa Fe style is the La Fonda Hotel, which as I said here, is once a Harvey house. Has anybody ever heard of the Harvey houses? Okay. There was a guy named Fred Harvey who was an entrepreneur, and he did a lot of traveling, and he was kind of appalled at the conditions that travelers had to put up with, you know, when they traveled in the Southwest. Although there were Harvey houses in Kansas too, I think Kansas and definitely Texas, but there were a number of them in New Mexico, including this hotel, which was a Harvey house. And what was special about the Harvey houses is they were very nice, but they also were served by what they called the Harvey girls. the Harvey girls had to apply. You had to apply to be a Harvey girl. You had to show you had good character, that you were dressed modestly, that you didn't get into trouble, really good, wholesome American girls, and so they were the ones that staffed his dining rooms, his hotels, his lunchrooms, all over. And it's said that a number of these Harvey girls ended up marrying people who had been their customers, to a lot of single guys out there, and that their first child, there were a lot of first male children named Fred and Harvey. So anyway, this is a wonderful hotel. It has big dining rooms and
We had a Harvey in my
yeah. Do you think that's where that name came from? Probably not. Yeah,
all of
right. Yeah, Ron.
what distinguishes that style.
Well, you see, like, look at the tower.
Yeah.
Yeah, how rounded it is. Yeah,
The-
yeah, and then right, and then these right here, these are actually called corbels. We're going to talk about those in a minute. But a hotel, they have here a kind of a portal with the beams sticking out. So they have to make allowances, when it's a hotel, it's a little, it's a little harder. This one is maybe a little easier to see how it looks more like a pueblo. You've got the different layers kind of. That's the Loretto Inn, which is, I don't know who Loretto was. We're going to talk about a chapel that's called the Loretto Chapel in a minute, but these kind of buildings really lend themselves at Christmas time. I'm not going to talk much about Santa Fe and Christmas because probably wouldn't, if you're going to go there, you probably don't go at Christmas time. But they put up what down there they call farolitos, which here they call luminarias. Down there, a luminaria is a little bonfire on the sidewalk, but a farolito is the bag with the sand and the candle and all that. And here's what they look like at Christmas. A building like this, they just put it, this is the Santa Fe Convention Center actually, and they, anywhere there's a different layer, they put the farolitos on, and it's really quite magical. And here is my house. So you can see, this is what the houses look like. My mother-in-law came to visit one summer. We normally weren't there in the summer, but our daughter was graduating from PT school in Albuquerque. So my mother-in-law came and she said, "Oh, your house is so unique." And I said, "Not here, it's not." This is what all the houses here look like. Ours is pretty small compared to a lot of them. But you can see there, like Ron, you see the rounded corners on the pillars. It's and the niches. That's another thing. There's the one over here. There's also another one around the other side, which we've never figured out what to put in there because it's real big. So, no, we're not air conditioned. No, we don't have any air conditioning, but other people do. We just don't. We don't happen to have any. Here's the patio of my house, and you can really see how everything is really kind of rounded. It's just a small. This is basically our yard. We have this little patio. That's kind of it. Yeah. Yeah, we like it. We like it there. Yeah, it does. Yeah, it's I didn't mention that, but it's at 7,000 feet. It's the highest capital. It not only is the oldest capital, it's the highest capital in the country. Denver's only a mile high. Santa Fe is 7,000 feet high.
Snow.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it can be. Yeah. Not necessarily, but there can be. I had a picture with some snow. I guess I didn't include that, but there's this, well, we'll talk about this toward the end too. There's a ski mountain. That's one of the reasons we like to go there. We like to ski. There's a ski mountain 15 miles from our house. It can get cold. Yeah, it can get cold. Yeah. It can definitely get cold there. Yeah. That's actually, it got colder this past winter, I think, than it ever. Do you remember a winter colder than this past winter? I think it got below zero several times. It was pretty cold. It was kind of annoying. but,
What do you use for heat?
well, we have gas. Yeah,
That-
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's not primitive there. I mean, it's, we have electricity, we have water, we have, yeah.
oh, it's been- oh,
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Santa Fe is 85,000 people.
Oh,
It's a big city. I mean, not that big, but it's bigger, a lot bigger than Alpena. But yeah, so what happened was, like I said, it was pretty small at the turn of the century, but, you know, culture and art and all these attractions, attracted people. There are so many artists in Santa Fe. I mean, we have some neighbors across the street who are artists. We know people, there are just a lot of artists who just paint in their houses and hopefully get an exhibit at a gallery, and sometimes do. And, this one I included just because I thought it was so funny. What do you think this is?
cool.
It's a parking structure. So even the parking structures, they try to make them kind of arty looking. I mean, for a parking structure, it's pretty good, don't you think? It's kind of, yeah, yeah. So I mentioned the corbels, okay? So here you see, that's what these curvy things are. Those are called corbels or corbels. I'm not sure really how it's pronounced, but these things right here. And then you see these things here. Well, the corbels are on a beam, and the beams are called vigas. And then these things are called latillas. That's all wood. There's a close-up of some latillas. If they laid them on top of the beams, the idea being to sort of replicate the idea of what the indigenous people used to do. To make a roof, they had to, this is the way they had to do it. And well, you saw in my house, right? The roof was flat. See how it's all flat? You see the house next door? Flat. They're all flat. And they what do you call it? Downslope it, so that the water runs off. And it runs down into, you can't really see this very well. I didn't get a good picture of this, but there's this little tiny thing right here. You can see that. That's called a canale. Right there. And the water comes out of that. It comes down. And there are canales. All the buildings have these canales.
No grass.
Well, no, not much grass because there's no water. Or there's not much water. They don't want to waste it on grass. Right. You can't wash your car during certain months. I mean, you can go to a car wash, but you can't wash your car at home during certain months, And the Santa Feans have, done quite a bit to try to conserve water. When the call goes out, we're in a drought. You need to conserve. That people really do try to do that. So back to these architectural features. Those are the latillas. And here's some more latillas with the vigas. This is in a church. This is in the church that we go to. And you see the corbels on the ends of the vigas. This is called a kiva fireplace, and this is a very common feature in Santa Fe. Most of the houses have them. This one is, a fairly plain one. Here's a kind of an elaborate one, but you see the commonality of the style. They're round and the opening is round. And we have one in our house too. It's in our bedroom for some reason, but in the interior of my house, this is inside my house, you see the viga and the corbel there. And there you see, this is like going from the living room into the kitchen, this curve, the way they curve all the walls. They're just, it's all a lot of curves. And there's a city view, gives you an idea of the color scheme. You see any red houses there? Do you see any green houses there? You see any white houses there? You don't, because they have rules. And pretty much it's brown. Everything is different shades of brown.
Nothing high either.
Um, are there? There are 3 stories? Okay. Yeah.
Compared to that mountain that's out in the center,
Mm-hmm.
what would be the approximate distance?
$20 miles? Okay. Jerry guesses 20 miles. I don't know.
20 miles?
20 miles maybe. Yeah. No. Mm-mm. Skiing mountains the other direction. And you can say, gosh, that's awfully regulated, you can't even paint your house what color you want to paint it and stuff, but that is the charm of this city. Is the look, and people are willing to go along with that. One thing that I couldn't get used to when I first got there was coyote fences. What the heck is a coyote fence? This is a coyote fence. I thought they were hideous. I thought they were so ugly. Like one like this, look at that. It's just, I thought they were really ugly, but you know what? They grew on me. They really did. And so, now I kind of like them. We actually have a little one to hide our trash cans, in the front of our house. I don't, no, it's not really a bite. It's just a sidewalk kind of thing that nobody ever walks on, I don't think. It is a bike path? Oh, okay. Shows you what I know. That's why I have him here, he correct me. These are called ristras. These are chili peppers that they string together and hang places for decorations. Everybody has them. They're all over the city. And they seem to last a long time. We don't have a big long one like this. We have some little ones that have like some garlic bulbs with them too and stuff, but they're in our kitchen and I don't know, they've been there, 10 years probably. And they don't attract bugs or do anything like that. So I couldn't, I had to mention arroyos, which, whenever I use that term, people say, what the heck is an arroyo? An arroyo is a dry wash. And this particular arroyo is, is fairly close to our house. We have another one that's close to our house. And that one time we were there in the summer, well, 2 times, because during COVID we were there. But one time there was the monsoons came. And the rain came down and it came down. I said, let's go down to the arroyo and see what it looks like. You would not have been able to stand up in it. There was so much water. Because it doesn't rain there, it just washes off. It just washes, it doesn't soak in. So, there are people that camp in these, so, homeless people got to be kind of careful because you wouldn't want to be in one when it rained. So let's talk a little bit about the culture. I asked Jerry on the way here, what do you think is the most interesting thing about Santa Fe? And this is what he said. He didn't use the term triculture because I don't know that he knew that term because I only just found it recently, but the blending of the 3 main groups. So you've got the indigenous people, you've got the Hispanics or Latinos or, whatever, and you've got the Anglos. Those are the three main groups that live there. Another cultural feature is the markets, which unfortunately, because we're not there in the summer, that's when most of the markets are. And so we miss a lot of that. But there are Indian markets, there's the Spanish market, the International Folk Art Market. People come and they, all these artists that make things and bring them. And
when you say Indian, could you elaborate on that? What kind of Indian culture there is?
well, we're going to, well, okay. I'll just say right now, I don't know if I mentioned this. Before the Spanish came, there were 100 pueblos in New Mexico. Now there are 19. So, it was the same thing that happened all over this continent, in South America too. Disease, colonialism, all the reasons that decimated the Indian population. But that's primarily, there are the 19 pueblos in New Mexico, but they're also Navajo and Mescalera Apache and Jicarilla Apache. Those are kind of the 3 main non-Pueblo groups.
They all stick around.
Yes. And, a lot of them have names like of the Pueblos. Like there's one called, it used to be called, everybody called it San Juan. And, and now everybody calls it by its indigenous name, which is Okeowinge. So, but a lot of them are still called by the old name, by the Spanish names. The Spanish gave everybody a name. So there's Santa Clara, there's Santo Domingo, and I'm mentioning the Pueblos. One thing we always do if we're going south to Albuquerque, there's a Pueblo on the way with a gas station. And you want to stop at those gas stations and get gas because they don't pay federal taxes. So their gas is a lot cheaper. So that's what everybody does. If they're going to go south, you stop at the Pueblos, get your gas. Yeah, there are reservations. Yeah, for sure. They're not as big, as they maybe used to be. They're well, each Pueblo is its own, I guess you could call it a tribe, but it's its own people. Yeah. And, today, I mean, they all speak English, but well, they've maintained a lot of that. See, they didn't get displaced. The Pueblos, they weren't considered savages because they didn't move around. They had cities, so the Spanish kind of, and the Americans, thought, what do we do with them? Well, we'll just leave them alone, leave them where they are. Although I think their children were sent to boarding school, but they weren't forced to move. But they have what they call feast days. I'll talk about that in a minute. But so the festivals, the indigenous festivals, I'll talk about that a little bit. They have a wine and chili fiesta, of course, a spring festival, and then the Santa Fe fiesta. And I have the word there, zozobra. Anybody ever heard that word? No, we're going to talk about zozobra. That's probably one of the most interesting things about Santa Fe. Here's a list of the 19 pueblos that remain in New Mexico. So you can see a number of them have the old indigenous name, but some of them have the Spanish name. And then what I mentioned about the additional tribes, and that the Hopi, people think about the Hopi being in New Mexico, and they are a little bit, but they're mainly headquartered in Arizona, but they have a significant presence in the Four Corners region. Does everybody know what the Four Corners is? Okay. No? Okay, well, that's where Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, and Arizona come together. Though that particular corner of every one of those states is a perfect right angle. See, so they all join right there. And so that's called the Four Corners area. You can stand, there's a place where you can stand there and you could, what was that game? There used to be a game, you do that with Twister, right? You can do that and you'll have each one of your limbs in a different state. So that's kind of fun. A lot of pictures taken in that spot. So the Native American influences, art, okay, pottery. There's a museum in an area in Santa Fe called Museum Hill. I'll talk about a little bit, but
Did you ever get the Indian market or,
no, because we're never there. Yeah. Yeah, I got a lot of pictures of art, which I'll show, but yeah, none of the markets. Although we've been to some markets and we haven't. Yeah, there is a winter one. Yeah. No, because it's cold. Yeah, but it's in the winter, they're not. In the winter, they're not. Yeah, they have them in the convention center or in a hotel. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But it's just tables, with, a lot of art. Yeah. But each pueblo, the pottery of each pueblo is so distinctive. The people that really know their pottery can look at a piece and they know what pueblo it came from. Same thing with the basketry. They have their own distinct style of baskets. I don't think jewelry as much, but and then, in terms of music, a lot of times well, especially on their feast days, there's a lot of drumming and chanting. On the plaza, you'll often hear flute players or drummers, and you'll even see dancing. some types of dancing. There's a thing called a hoop dance, which is really fascinating. These young men, maybe girls do it too, I think, but they have hoops, sort of like hula hoop. It's probably about that big, and they have 6 of them, and they throw them up in the air, and they do all kinds of stuff with them. You know, they'll have like all of a sudden 6 of them spread out like this, and they're an eagle. You know, just fascinating dances. But
Have changed, or do they have changed? I'm thinking, it sounds like they're staying with the old culture. Is this what the children do too?
yeah, I'm gonna pass around something here. So if you see at the bottom of this slide, cultural dances, they have there are probably more than this, but these are the ones that I've heard about: deer dance, buffalo dance, corn dance, eagle dance, rabbit dance, turtle dance. Jerry and I went to a deer dance and a corn dance. And they do these on their feast days, and each pueblo has a different feast day. And feast is like it sounds. They cook a lot of food, and but people that go there don't eat the food. I mean, they don't have the food out there for you to eat. I guess you can get invited to those somehow, but we've never figured out how to do that. But we watch the dances. So here is you can't take pictures of that either. But this was done by a Native American, so he could take pictures. And this is called a deer dance, and this was done at Laguna Pueblo. And I think at least this one is a child. But usually, just pass that around. Usually the children are, like if they're men that do the dance, they're little boys that do it too. And so like the deer dance, for example, they cover their faces and they have antlers, So, and then they walk with these sticks. Those are supposed to be their front legs. And that's how they look.
You say you're not allowed to photograph?
No. You have to be real careful about taking pictures of Indians. Yeah, some of them feel like it steals part of their soul or something, Yeah.
Well, the Amish don't like to be photographed.
Oh, don't they? I didn't know that. Okay.
Antlers are really spiritual, religious.
Yeah, yeah.
They're not for entertainment, but they allow you to come and watch. And some have some rules, really, that you don't want to break. You don't want to pick anything up or anything.
So they're not on the internet.
No, I don't think so. I don't know, maybe. I've never looked on the internet to see if you could find one. Yeah, probably.
Children.
Oh, yeah, I think they do. Yeah, yeah. The ones that we went to, the males were the ones that would wear the costumes like to look like a deer. The women also dance too, but they a lot of times they're interspersed, or sometimes the women do their own special dance, or they're and they wear their native costume, which are very, very, can be very beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. So here's just some examples of some art that I think, it's Indian inspired, clearly. That this is at an art gallery. I'm going to talk about where this is in a minute, but some of these are ones that I just thought were just really beautiful and kind of similar. Those last two, these two are pretty similar. This one is at the Capitol, which I'll show you the Capitol in a minute. This one is in front of the Basilica, the Cathedral Basilica. But just so you don't think they're all women, here's a male flute player. I found this was at an art gallery. And then the one from my cover slide, this is an Apache sculpture that I just think is wonderful. And there's a close-up of his foot. I thought was just really, really cool. Here's another one that I don't know. I think it's supposed to represent a deer dance, kind of. It looks like a deer, sort of, But you look at this gallery and you see, the different. You can see behind there is another sculpture. That's kind of a style, I think, of a particular sculptor. It does a lot of that kind of thing. The art is amazing. Santa Fe, 85,000 people. is the third largest art market in the country after New York and Los Angeles. So that just goes to show you, it's, little things can come in, the good things can come in little packages, I guess. But that's an example of some of the art. I mean, there's just art everywhere. I mean, if I took a picture of every single, just outside sculpture, I mean, we'd be here, for a couple weeks.
So this is indigenous, the people that live there.
Some of it is, some of it's just inspired, yeah.
We've been to the one in Dallas that covers things from all over the world.
Yeah, yeah. So then the other cultural group that we haven't really talked about, the descendants of the first Europeans. As I said, I did talk about they came in the 15th century. They brought their own language, they brought their own food, they brought their own religious practices. The Franciscans were really the ones. It was said that the Spanish government said that they could colonize as long as the Franciscans went with them, which I always thought was pretty ironic when you think about the brutality that I talked about of Oñate, for example. But in 1850, the Catholic Church sent a bishop, Bishop Lamy is the way that's pronounced, Bishop Lamy. So you can imagine he didn't come from Spain. He came from France. Why they sent him there, I don't know. So you have all this Spanish-speaking people, but you have a French bishop. I don't know what the Pope was thinking, but anyway, he sent Bishop Lamy, and the town that I mentioned that Santa Fe has a railroad spur to, we pronounce it Lamy for that because that's the way we would pronounce it. I put that he's not a Jesuit. I couldn't find that he really was, but he invited a lot of Jesuit priests to come to New Mexico. So we're sort of converting from the Franciscans now to the Jesuits, and of course the artistic expression's a little bit different than the indigenous expressions. And, these are the names that I found that to refer to these people: Hispanos, New Mexican Hispanics, or Nuevo Mexicanos. Take your pick. Well, it's like with any indigenous people, we've talked about this, I think, Pat, right? Where, what is okay with one person is not okay with another person. And the only way to know is to ask them, what can I call you? So, yeah, the types of Spanish American art. And with all these things, there's so many Spanish terms for everything. And one is called a retablo, which is a devotional painting. It's often on wood or tin. And the saints are big in Santa Fe. Saints are everywhere. You get so after a while, you kind of know, not every saint, but you can kind of tell what some of the saints are because of what they have with them maybe, or the way they're dressed, or something like that. But this is a retablo that I have, which it's hard to tell. This is actually a box. It's a little box. It's about this big. And this particular figure is called El Niño de Atocha. And what he's supposed to symbolize is Jesus. There are a lot of legends around this particular figure, that he went to prisons and fed prisoners who had no other way of getting food. So you see the little gourd there on the, well, let's see, on the right side of this picture is, water. And then the little basket on the left side, has some food in it. So that's how you always know when you see a figure like this, this is El Niño de Atocha, because he has the gourd and he has the basket. And those are always, always present with him. And then there are something called boltos, which are more like sculptures. And those, again, are typically saints, or, Madonnas, or, religious figures anyway. Here's another one. This is painted on the side of a building, which I thought was really funny. It's a bar, I guess, the North Bar or something. But this particular figure is San Isidro, Saint Isidro. And how I know that is because he's behind some oxen. He's the patron saint of farmers. And it was said about him that he did so much praying that he didn't do his farm work. And so people complained about it. And so some angels came and they did his farm work for him so he could continue to pray. So that's San Isidro. Then you had the Anglo-Americans that came in the 19th century, as distinct from Spaniards. Not that they're not, I mean, Anglo is more like, English, I think, speaking English anyway. So we have a new set of cultural influences: religion, government, and art. So let's talk about the religion. I made a collage. This is a picture of my collage. These are all representations, whether they're sculptures or paintings or carvings, of St. Francis, every one of them. He is everywhere in Santa Fe. He's the patron saint of Santa Fe, and he's everywhere. And so I just thought it would be fun to take a picture of all the ones I could find everywhere. I even found one in somebody's yard. So, it's not just, but you can always tell St. Francis, of course, because he's either got some birds or some animals, or, he's a nature lover. So this is the Cathedral Basilica of St. Francis of Assisi, which reminds me, I did not mention the real name of Santa Fe, which is La Villa Real de la Santa Fe de San Francisco de Asís, which means Royal Town of the Holy Faith of St. Francis of Assisi. That's the official name of Santa Fe. Of course, everyone just calls it Santa Fe, which means Holy Faith. So that's the basilica. It was built in, I think it was 1865. I've forgotten now, something like that. It's a Catholic church, of course, and it's very big. They have free concerts there at Christmas time, which is very nice. And you might wonder about the towers. Why don't they have something on the top of those towers, like some kind of a steeple or something? And it's something to do with the weight, right, Jerry? They thought they wouldn't support them or something. Your mind is a blank? Okay. Anyway, it's a very large church. This is the Loretto Chapel. I mentioned this earlier, that there was a chapel called Loretto Chapel. It's really, it was on the list of museums, so I guess it's considered a museum. If you get to Santa Fe, you need to go there. And the reason is they have a stairway there. It's called a miraculous stairway. It's a kind of a rounding, spiral. It goes around and it goes up, and there's no visible means of support on that stairway. And of course, there's a legend to go with that the nuns were getting old and they couldn't, take this regular stairway to get, they were having trouble getting up to the balcony, and so they prayed to Saint Joseph, who was the carpenter, saint of carpenters, that he would help them. And then all of a sudden one day this carpenter shows up and he makes them this stairway, and then he disappears before they could even pay him. They didn't know his name, they didn't know anything about him, but he made this stairway, and it's a miracle. I somewhere had a picture of the stairway, but I couldn't find it. So you'll just have to do with the outside of the church. This is the Presbyterian church. That's the one that we go to when we're there. It's the oldest Protestant church in New Mexico. And they, originally it was a brick building, and then the Santa Fe style came along, and they said, oh, we gotta get in on that. And so I don't know if they tore the old one down or whatever they did. Anyway, they came up with this building, and there's an architect very famous in Santa Fe. His name is John Gaw Meem, and he was the architect for this church. And then you have the Holy Faith Episcopal Church, which is completely different, English Gothic revival. I don't know what they were thinking, but but that's the church there. And you see that statue of St. Francis right there. That's one of the ones in my collage for sure. It's a big church. Okay, government, politics. This is the state capitol. It's called the Roundhouse, and you can kind of tell, right? It's round. That's why it's called the Roundhouse. And what I think many people don't know when they go to Santa Fe is they have a great collection of art inside this building. And, you can go in there, so if you want to go in and see the art. They don't have a Georgia O'Keeffe. They've said every time, like we went on a tour and the tour guide said every time she does a tour, people want to know, do you have a Georgia O'Keeffe? She says, well, if somebody wants to donate one, we would take it, but yeah. So all the protests, this is where they happen, right here, or else they lead to this point, maybe they start somewhere else and then they end up at the Capitol. There's one on Saturday, actually, I'm told. So that this is the Roundhouse, took over from the Palace of the Governors, which was the original Capitol place, building. So now we have the Roundhouse. And I should mention, Santa Fe is a very liberal city. It's a blue city for sure. They I think are a sanctuary city, actually. So for the art, we've already talked about a lot of the art already, but I can't not talk about Canyon Road. Canyon Road is the first art gallery built on Canyon Road was 1956, but since then it's just boomed. I mean, not every art gallery is on Canyon Road, but there are a lot of art galleries on Canyon Road. So you just walk down this road and, some of them are just little buildings, go in, some of them have big yards. You can go in and see all kinds of sculptures and, it's like half a mile maybe of just art, incredible. And at Christmas time and Christmas Eve, everybody goes there and walks on Canyon Road and the art galleries are all lit up and, it's fun. Here's an example of one that has a big yard. But there are over 250 art galleries in Santa Fe. They actually do both. They have the luminarias, which are bonfires, and they have the farolitos also. Yeah. Yeah, it is beautiful. Yeah. This is Museum Hill, which you see there are two museums at this particular spot. The one on the left of the screen is the Museum of Indian Arts and Culture, and the one on the right is the Museum of International Folk Art, which is my favorite. I love the International Folk Art Museum, and they have special exhibits, just all kinds of stuff. But in addition to these two, there's also one called the Wheelwright Museum and one that used to be called the Spanish Colonial Art Museum and has just been renamed. And of course, I wrote it down, but now I forget what it's called. And then I'm missing one, aren't I? Are there just the four up there? I guess, yeah, just four up there. But you get a lot of bang for your buck if you go up to Museum Hill. And then, they have the sculpture in the parking lot. How many parking lots have sculptures? I mean, it's just, I just think it's wonderful. Really, really unusual. This is I just did a little example of some of the art around. This is all animal themed ones I thought would be kind of fun. So you got a bear, you got a bison, a moose, a wolf, and a elk, which is a little hard to see, the elk. But, lots of different, these are all at art galleries. Lots of different, modern kind of representations, although the moose doesn't look too modern, or the wolf either. And then just out there, not in an art gallery, this one on the top left is at a bank, the one with the mother bear and the cubs, that's at a bank. Then over to the right of that, that's a city sculpture. It's called Santa Fe Current. And those are 27 cutthroat trout made from granite that was carved in China, a place called Stone City, China. The artist made a model of them and sent the model to them, and then they carved all these. And can you imagine what it cost to ship those back from China? 27. I mean, these are pretty big. They're like this big. Yeah. Then continuing on clockwise, you see the swing. That big dog with the swing. I mean, it's just, that is the coolest sculpture. I love that one. Yeah. And then continuing on the big steer, his head actually goes up and down. You can move it, so you get a little interactive art there. And then finally, the burro. The burro is kind of a significant thing in Santa Fe history. There wasn't a lot of wood, around. And so people would go and gather wood and load it onto these burros and bring it into town. So people would have that for firewood. And so that's what this burro represents. And this little alley is called Burro Alley. So they have the burro there. And I'll tell you, my son's dog did not like that burro. I think animals know that. It looks like an animal, but it's not an animal. And so they don't like it, you know, so. Okay, things to do. Try to run through this fairly quickly. Okay, ski area, you see that? That's where we go, 15 miles. So that's one thing you can do if you go in the winter. This past winter, it opened a week early, but it had to close a week early. It's because they didn't get much snow after that initial snow. And they make snow, but you know, you can't make that forever. So you could take a tour. They have these little tour buses, you know, like any city, you know, you can hop on one of these and go all around. They'll show you the sights. Okay, find a spectacular tree. I got it. This tree has a story. This is a sequoia tree. Now, I don't think it's the same, what would you call it? The same type of sequoia as you would find in California, but it's a big tree. I don't know if you can tell. It's a big tree. And this tree used to be about, what, 30 feet further back. And they wanted to build like a condo for seniors there. But this tree was in the way. And so I'm not sure whether the city made them move it or whether they just, as a, you know, an environmental thing, they decided to move it. They moved this tree. Can you imagine that? It was incredible. And we live fairly close to this, so we were able to kind of watch the progression. We did not see them actually move the tree, but we saw it when they had it all kind of dug around it, like, you know, they were going to lift it out, and then when they put it down. And the first year, it got kind of brown. And everybody's freaking out, writing letters to the editor, you know, what is our tree dying? You know, what's going on? And so they had an arborist come in to look at it who said, no, it's just been shocked a little, you know, it'll be all right. And this is, I don't know, it's probably been there 6, 7 years now, maybe. And it's beautiful, you know, it recovered, it bounced back, you know. I just thought it was just so incredible that they moved this tree. I had to take a picture of it. Yeah. Yeah, half as big as this room, he says. Yeah, sort of forgotten about that. But okay, so how many places can you go where there's a dime store? I mean, come on, you know. I love this. It's one of my favorite places to go. If you need, you know, you need to get some tchotchke, you know, for some, you know, mementos of Santa Fe, this is where you go. You go to the dime store. You can find tons of postcards and just all kinds of little shot glasses if you collect those, you know, just all kinds of stuff in there. And that store has been there, I think, a really long time. And they have the famous, you can see, maybe you can kind of tell on the sign, the famous Frito pie, which some people really like. I don't know, kind of weird, but yeah. You could eat at a food truck. If you can tell, that's what all those are. And they're right across from the Capitol, which is not surprising because, you know, those government workers need to eat. And I forgot to mention that in New Mexico, the Capitol they only sit for 2 months 1 year and 1 month the next year. That's it. That's their whole legislative session. And they don't get paid. And sometimes they don't get a lot done, but the newspaper reports on it every day, what, you know, what they've been doing. And, you know, so everybody kind of monitors that. So the rail yard is kind of an interesting area. It has a lot of shops and farmers market every Saturday. And there's a movie theater there, and you know, it's just another place, you know, to go. The plaza. Okay, here's the plaza, which, you know, if you remember what I said about the Palace of the Governors is over on that side, over on the right there. Back this way. And then you can maybe figure out why the center of the plaza is so ugly. This is the center of the plaza. And there's a whole history to this, which is still going on. This was called, there used to be an obelisk on the top of this. And these panels, the four panels, three of them commemorate various battles from the Civil War. There actually was a pretty big Civil War battle, a couple of them in New Mexico. And so those commemorate that. And then the fourth panel, the one that's kind of damaged there, was to commemorate the Union soldiers who fought in these wars, but also fought against the savage Indians. And that didn't sit too well with a lot of people. And so in 1974, I think it was, the word savage was scratched out by somebody. And then when a lot of statues were being toppled and stuff, this one was definitely gone after, and they toppled the obelisk and damaged that part of the panel that you can see there. So the city covered it all up with plywood, you know, so it was even uglier than this. You know, you just have this plywood box, you know, in the middle of your plaza, which is really pretty amazing. And so somebody went to court about it, and the court said, you got to do something. You got to either put it back like it was, or you have to, you know, figure out, or leave it like it is, or do something. And so that's still going on. There's a commission or something that's trying to decide. But I mean, this has been years. This has been since George Floyd. I don't know, how many years has that been? 4 years? I think 5 years? 5 years, yeah. It's, you know, yeah. Yeah, they're working on it. So that's kind of the story of that. This is actually the train station, which is an old building, as you can see, and it has the real Spanish influence with the red tile roof and stuff. And here's the train. This is the train that goes to Albuquerque. It's the commuter train. And you can see on the front of that, the very engine, that represents a road runner, you know, but this is called the rail runner, you know, kind of after the, you know, make a little play on words there for that. An hour. And they give discounts for seniors on Wednesdays, I think. Wednesdays, yeah.
About that train, we were there when they were almost finished building.
Oh, yeah?
The tracks go right down the middle of the expressway.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
You got the expressway's 4-lane expressway, and they couldn't find land because it's Indian property on all sides.
Mm-hmm.
So they just put it right down the middle.
Yeah. 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 Yep. Okay, I promise this, and you're gonna get everybody's favorite festival, Zozobra. Zozobra was the creation of an artist named Will Schuster, who was the one that painted those paintings at the Museum of Art that were outside that I mentioned. And I don't know, he just got this idea that this was in 1924, and things weren't so hot then, I guess, economically. And so he created this figure that he called Zozobra, and that was to stand for like old man gloom. And it was supposed to dispel gloom. So you write down what you're gloomy about, I guess, and stick them in this thing. And the first one that he made, he just burned in his backyard. It's sort of like, have you ever heard about Burning Man? I don't know if you've heard of that in Nevada. This is a lot older than Burning Man, in 1924. Okay, so the first couple of years, oh, I got a typo there. First couple of years, he burned it in his backyard. But then everybody said, oh no, Will, you got to share this with everybody. So then they started making it really big. Yeah, it's like 50 feet tall. It's built every year because every year it gets burned. So every year, you can really see it burning. And so it's a big festival, you know, a big deal. And people write down, you know, their things. And also, you know, maybe you've got a divorce decree, you know, whatever it is, you can stick it in this. They have special receptacles where you put all your gloomy stuff, and then they put it inside the Zozobra, and he burns. And he's like a big marionette. His arms go up and down and his head turns and stuff. Unfortunately, this always happens Labor Day weekend, and we're never there, but we were there during COVID, but it was during COVID. And so they had it on TV. So we at least got to see it on TV. But there are representations of Zozobra, you know, you can see them all over. And this is the latest one. This This is just brand new. When we showed up this past fall, here it was in Santa Fe. So this is a brand new thing of zozobra. I love that one. Not that one, no, that's like made out of, I don't know, what's it? Ceramic? Yeah, yeah. Yeah. And then you see this is supposed to be Will Schuster over here. It's little right here. Talks about how, but they celebrated, they put this up because they celebrated the 100th anniversary of Zozobra in 2024. So, and then this is from the tourism, all the other photos except a couple that I said where they came from were my photos, but this is, I didn't have this particular viewpoint, so I stuck this one in from Tourism Santa Fe, but it gives you, that you can see the basilica there and it gives you an idea of, just how, what everything looks like. So, and then they even use the name on business signs and business names and stuff. We have the city different. So that's it.